Brexit Britain has been handed a massive boost thanks to billionaire Elon Musk, who has eyed up the Isle of Man for a new Starlink ground station. The South African tech mogul is on course to supply the globe with satellite-based internet, and Brexit Britain will play a role in achieving this goal. Elon Musk's internet company has been granted a license to construct a Starlink ground station on the Isle of Man. Ground stations are a key element of Starlink's infrastructure as they facilitate links between internet data centers and SpaceX's growing constellation of satellites. The Isle of Man station will be the company's third ground station built in or around the UK. Starlink ground stations have already been built in Cornwall and Buckinghamshire, paving the way for full internet coverage of Britain. The ground stations are conceived of multiple satellite dishes that exchange data with Starlink satellites in space by tapping into existing fiber optic infrastructure. Starlink is an offshoot of Mr. Musk's aerospace company SpaceX, which has recently secured a lucrative deal to land astronauts on the moon for NASA. According to the Department for Enterprise (DFE), the Starlink infrastructure is already being commissioned on the island. The DFE also noted it is excellent to see this project moving to the next stage. But Starlink is not the only company vying to use the Isle of Man as a base of operations in the region. There are presently 11 licensed operators on the island, including Manx Telecom, Optify, and Blue Wave Communications. The Isle of Man, which is not part of the UK, is a self-governing British Crown dependency in the Irish Sea. Sue Strang of the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority told the BBC, Starlink will potentially add more choice and switching options for consumers in the already competitive broadband market. To date, SpaceX has launched more than 1,700 Starlink satellites into orbit using its iconic Falcon 9 rocket. The company aims to put at launch up to 42,000 of these internet-beaming satellites to build a so-called mega constellation in low Earth orbit (LEO). Earlier this year Mr. Musk said the bold plan would likely need up to £21.5 billion ($30 billion) in investment to materialize. Starlink Internet is already accessible in parts of the US, Canada, UK, Germany and New Zealand. But as the Starlink constellation grows and more ground stations are built, it is expected to reach every corner of the globe with high-speed, low-latency broadband. But the company faces tough competition from the UK's own OneWeb communications company. The satellite operator, which is headquartered in London, had filed for bankruptcy in March 2020 after failing to secure investment into its satellite network. However, OneWeb was propped up by the government and the Indian company Bharti Global. OneWeb is now well on its way to launch its OneWeb constellation of 650 LEO satellites, with more than 200 already zipping around the planet. The British company Inmarsat is also looking to go global with its recently unveiled project, Orchestra. The first-of-its-kind network of satellites will boost mobile coverage by combining the benefits of 5G with LEO and geosynchronous orbit (GEO) satellites. Rajiv Suri, CEO of Inmarsat, called this plane the future of connectivity. The senior police officer leading the investigation into Streatham terrorist Sudesh Aman has denied suggestions from his family's lawyer that the undercover operation was a failure. The officer, known only as HA6 to protect his identity, stated there was a lack of evidence against 20-year-old Aman in the days before he struck on February 2, 2020. Stabbing and injuring two members of the public in broad daylight before being shot dead by armed police. He said police actions that day prevented further tragedy. Giving evidence at the inquest into Aman's death on Friday, at the Royal Courts of Justice, the senior officer said, "This is a view held by my peers. The professionalism and the bravery of those officers and what they prevented, it could have been far, far worse. For those of us in the investigations team, we are grateful for their actions on that day." The inquest previously heard how Aman was deemed to be one of the most dangerous individuals that police and MI5 teams had investigated. And that police feared an attack would be when, not if during discussions a fortnight ahead of his release. He was automatically released from Belmarsh Prison on January 23, 2020, partway through a 40-month sentence for obtaining and disseminating terrorist materials. This was despite police pleas to the Belmarsh governor to detain Amman for longer after intelligence suggested he maintained an extremist mindset, wanted to carry out a knife attack in the future, and pledged allegiance to the leader of so-called Islamic State. Amman, who is originally from Coventry and of Sri Lankan descent, but was previously of Harrow in northwest London, spent 10 days living in a bail hostel in Streatham, South London, during which time undercover police teams monitoring him remarked at his concerning behavior. Amman was seen by covert police buying 4 bottles of Earn Brew, kitchen foil and parcel tape from a local Poundland on January 31st. Items which were used to fashion a fake suicide belt he wore during his rampage on Streatham High Road 2 days later. But they said there was not enough evidence to arrest him and feared searching his room would blow their cover. Rajiv Menon QC, for Amman's family, accused police of making the wrong call and not to intervene at the time. HA6 replied, given the threat he posed, the methodology of the attack. I would counter that by saying the police stopped an attack that could have been far, far worse. He added, if he, Amman, had been arrested, he would have been back out in the community and would have had an operational advantage. It would have made our response harder. Nigel Farage and a retired border force agent have blasted the government's handling of the migrant crisis, asking why ministers have allowed the situation to continue. Kevin Saunders joined Mr. Farage on GB News to discuss the government's failing on migrant crossings. Mr. Saunders, a retired UK border force agent, said it is absolutely ridiculous Britain is not doing more to prevent migrants crossing the channel. Mr. Farage asked, I've heard reports of migrant dinghies no more than 50 meters off the French beaches. The French Navy then escort these boats into UK waters. Why are we allowing the situation to continue? Mr. Saunders replied, it's interesting, the Home Secretary has gone to visit the Greeks because the Greek coastal patrol vessels are adopting a much different approach. They are actually pushing them back into Turkish waters. So my argument is, if the Greeks can do it with the support of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the EU Commission, why can't we push the vessels back into French waters? Mr. Saunders added, the French are saying it is illegal for us to push the boats back into French waters. But they are not saying it is illegal for the Greeks to push the boats back into Turkish waters. Mr. Farage responded, there are no rules in the EU, everyone does as they want. Home Secretary Priti Patel has long insisted the UK government needs to do more to fight back against human trafficking gangs. The Home Office confirmed French authorities had stopped 3,600 from making the journey so far this year. It also said officials have guaranteed 65 prosecutions related to small boats since the start of the year. This comes after 10,000 people successfully made the dangerous journey across the English Channel this year, according to figures. More than 3,300 migrants arrived in the UK in July, setting a new record for a single month. Crossings in 2021 have now already surpassed the total number for the whole of 2020, and there are still 5 months of the year still to go. Dan O'Mahony, clandestine channel threat commander for the Home Office, said, these dangerous small boat crossings, facilitated by criminal gangs, are putting lives at risk. Boris Johnson could have used a canary. The UK Prime Minister, on a visit in Scotland on Thursday, caused a stir when he joked that former PM Margaret Thatcher's closure of coal mines had given Britain a head start on tackling climate change. A quip Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon called crass and deeply insensitive. Johnson said, thanks to Margaret Thatcher, who closed so many coal mines across the country. We had a big early start and we're now moving rapidly away from coal altogether. According to the BBC, Johnson then laughed and told reporters, I thought that would get you going. Thatcher's handling of the coal industry's decline in the 1980s is still seen by the public as one of the biggest failures of her tenure. Particularly in Scotland and the north of England, where communities were most affected by the closures. Millions of people protested against the shutdowns, with violent clashes often occurring between miners and police. Lives and communities in Scotland were utterly devastated by Thatcher's destruction of the coal industry, which had zero to do with any concern she had for the planet. Sturgeon tweeted, "To treat that as something to laugh about is crass and deeply insensitive to that reality." Labour leader Keir Starmer also took aim at the PM, Boris Johnson's shameful praising of Margaret Thatcher's closure of the coal mines. Brushing off the devastating impact on those communities with a laugh, shows just how out of touch he is with working people. But it wasn't just the usual suspects taking aim at Johnson. Brexiteer former MEP Patrick O'Flynn tweeted, "By far the biggest gaffe of Boris Johnson's political career, this. Absolutely taking the piss out of communities that were torn apart. I'm sickened by it." Fellow Leaver Claire Fox, whom Johnson put in the Lords, replied to O'Flynn, "Well, bloody said.